Hi, this is Scott Bradfield. I'm buttoning up my. This is the buttoning up your shirt edition of the bathtub. Welcome to the bathtub. This is going to be one of our more imperfect episodes. This week in the bathtub, last week in the bathtub actually. I've fallen behind in these. I read a book which I've always wanted to read, and I don't know why, called Triplanetary by E. Doc Smith. Now, most SF buffs will know of his name. I don't know how often you've read him, but he's an interesting uh, source of a lot of contemporary science fiction. He was a big influence on Heinlein and the Asimov and the writers in the 40s and the 50s, and he was sort of one of the. I think people used to call him the Gosh Wow school of science fiction. A lot of this stuff, I'm going to be very incorrect on a lot of this, but a lot of this stuff came out in the 20s and 30s originally. Uh, he started off with a series called the Skylark series, and he's most famous for what's considered his best books, which are the Lensman series. I still have had these around for ages, and they've been sort of following me around all my life, and I've always meant to read them. And after reading Beckett, I thought, well, variety and repetition. This is quite a variety. This is quite a nice shift from Beckett. So when you move from like this one lone character walking across a spare landscape to go to a population of billions and trillions of universes, and everyone's fighting each other, and there's two ancient races who go back trillions of years or whatever, some enormous span of time is covered. The I also thought the series would be kind of interesting for those of you who are interested in this first book that we did in the series, Thomas Pynchon's Against the Day, because there is a sort of element of those old 20s and 30s uh, space epics when you have that group of people flying these giant balloons through the sky and going into the center of the earth, and there's some real fantastic space adventures that are occurring in the realm of the Earth in this book, and that whole cast and crew of the balloon have some of this extravagant and adventure-oriented boys' wonder stories from the 20s and 30s that Pynchon's clearly read. Um, Triplanetary. I'm not going to talk too much about these, but uh, the most important thing to know is that the books were written not in sequence. I believe the first book that Smith wrote was in the series was called Galactic Patrol. I have not read it, but I've been told that's the best of the series. And then he wrote a series of 3 or 4 books, which went along to tell the story of the Lensman, and it's tied in with a lens that Kim Kinnison brings back from some planet that makes everybody super smart or something. And then Smith went back and wrote the prequels to the series. So he's one of the first to write the prequel, which is not always a good sign, when people write prequels. The interesting parts of Triplanetary is that it sort of sets up this story. It envisions a universe which is ruled over by 2 super races. One's called the Arisians, and I think the other ones are called the Edorans. It sounds a little bit like the sort of Manichaean universe of L. Ron Hubbard's, those weird L. Ron Hubbard late Dianetic books about the universe being run by these spiritual forces. It certainly sounds a bit similar. I can't speak clearly about that because I haven't read much of the Hubbard. So it sounds like it might have had some influence on it. It certainly has an influence on writers who I think are really interesting, which we do want to read in the bathtub, such as A.E. Van Vogt, probably one of the greatest Canadian writers no one's ever heard of, completely insane prose writer, a novelist. And I'm getting away from myself. Triplanetary goes back and tries to envision the prequel to this story, which is about these 2 super races fighting out this universal domination and enlisting or being involving the help of Kim Kinnison and the Galactic Patrol. So you have, again, you can see the influence of this kind of galaxy-spanning super adventure stories on the Star Wars, most obviously, and certainly on the work of A.E. Van Vogt and Asimov. But this is sometimes I think actually the covers of these books are much more interesting than the books. What happens in this book is you have a kind of prequel in which the original battle between the Arisians and the Adorans is sort of set up, which is that the Arisians somehow manage to hide themselves from their arch enemies and operate in secret throughout the history of human civilization. And then we have Kinnison, who's the hero of the later books. We have his ancestors. I think they're actually go back to Atlantis, and there's a series of short stories in which Kinnison's ancestors die fighting for something. I forget what. I can't really remember. It's a really completely mad book, and it doesn't really get going until about page 60 or 70. And I've actually managed to lose the passage I wanted to read to you because there's some. Basically, these several human beings are captured by the Adorans, and then some fish creature named Nerado and his planet capture them, and then they start doing eugenics and torturing them and trying to examine human behavior. And then there's lots of battling, lots of galactic battles. I have to say I skimmed through large parts of this book, but there were parts of it that were quite interesting. I'm just going to read a real brief passage, which is totally at random. There's lots of large descriptions of big galactic battles between giant spaceships, and they're all fighting each other, okay? And here's one from 191, and the chapter's called Super Ship in Action. Flaming a dazzling white from the friction of the atmosphere through which she had torn her way, the Boise, this is the spaceship, slowed abruptly as she neared the ground, plunging toward the surface of the small but deep artificial lake below the hill's steel apron. Into the cold waters the spaceship dove, and even before they could close over her, furious geysers of steam and boiling water erupted as the stubborn alloy gave up its heat to the cooling liquid. Endlessly, the 3 necessary minutes dragged their slow way into time, but finally the water ceased boiling, and Rodebush tore the ship from the lake and hurled her into the gaping doorway of her dock. The massive doors of the airlocks opened, and while the full crew of picked men hurried aboard with their personal equipment, Sams talked earnestly to the 2 scientists in the control room. And about half the fleet is still in the air, Sam says. They aren't attacking. They're just trying to keep her from doing much more damage until you can get there. How about your takeoff? We can't launch you again. The tracks are gone. But you handle her easily, though, coming in. And there's lots of talk about what great spaceship captains they are. I'm treating this quite lightly. It's a ridiculous book. It has a real imaginative energy to it, which is worth exploring. I do not know whether I will follow through and read any more of the books in the series, though I have been told that if you read any of the books in the series, you should read Galactic Patrol. That's what I've been told on good authority. And whether the whole series is worth reading, I don't know. He definitely has narrative energy and a lot of power, and just sort of imagines these crazy scenarios into existence. He's not as interesting to me so far as Van Vogt. And we will definitely do some Van Vogt in the future. So that's just a very brief placeholder for the series there. I'm sorry, so imperfect. I thought I'd just tell some of you who might know Pynchon and who don't know some of these types of books, which clearly influence Pynchon, that you might like to know. They're out there, and they're perfect for the bathtub. They're a little bit long. That's my only experience. My only opinion after reading only one of the books and reading it imperfectly. So have a good week, and we'll come back with something completely different next time I see you.